Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Greer and it's lovely to have you here with me as always. So we're officially at the end of the year and that means that it's time for another yearly favorites video. I did this for the first time last year when I first started this channel. If you're interested in watching it, I'm going to put part 1 somewhere up here for you. This year's categories are going to be slightly different. We're not going to do newsletters because most of the newsletters that I read this year are the same ones that I spoke about last year, and then I actually haven't listened to that many new podcasts this year either, so we're gonna leave that category out. We're gonna be doing books, apps, movies and shows, games, and music. So without further ado, let's start with my favorite books of 2023. We are going to start off with Arranged Marriage by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. So this is a collection of 11 short stories about Indian immigrants. Most of our protagonists are women who have migrated from their homeland India to the United States by way of an arranged marriage of some sort, and they're sort of caught between two worlds, so wanting to uphold and maintain their traditions and cultural values and carving out their own identities separate from that. So in a lot of these stories we see what it looks like for them to come face to face with Western culture and how it differs from what they know. Now if you're an avid reader of Jhumpa Lahiri, this probably sounds very familiar to you, and I think I'm always subconsciously comparing other writers who explore similar themes to her. But in all fairness, this book stood on its own. It's such a great collection of stories, full of commentary on what it means for Indian women to find themselves in the shadow of patriarchy. Banerjee's writing is similar to Lahiri's in that it is nuanced, it is contemplative, it's reflective. You can tell that she has a deep understanding and awareness of the human condition and social issues, particularly when it comes to the Indian diaspora. So if you're a Jhumpa Lahiri fan, I highly recommend checking this book out. And now another fiction favorite for me this year was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. Now this book is considered a beloved American classic. It is a coming of age story that follows young Francie Nolan, who is growing up with her family in pre-World War Brooklyn, specifically the slums of Williamsburg. So it's told from her perspective from the ages of 11 all the way up until age 17. It is semi-autobiographical, which means that, a lot of the inspiration for the book actually came from Betty Smith's life. This book is quite different from what I usually read. It's a lot longer than the books that I usually read as well, but I'm glad that I stuck with it because it was such a rewarding experience. I really enjoy that it was told from Francie's point of view. I love that we get to see her childhood innocence in the beginning and how that shaped her outlook on the world, and even starting to see her come out of that and coming face to face with the realities of her life. Her dad being an alcoholic, her mom having to work tirelessly just to make ends meet. And so despite all of the hardships that her family experiences, Francie still somehow manages to maintain a positive outlook on life. This book is such a real and tender look at family life and how important it is to be able to lean on family during hardship. And it also doesn't stray away from looking realistically at what some of those hardships can be. So dealing with assault, death, religion, poverty, the class system. I think one of my favorite excerpts of this book comes from a prayer that Francie says. I think this is just before the start of the war. It's also a time where she's starting to realize what she wants out of life. And I just found that so beautiful, because it speaks to this desire to feel alive, to feel something at all points throughout your life, never to be complacent or to just exist and not feel. The final book that I'm going to talk about is Too Much and Not the Mood by Durga Chubose. This is a book that I actually learned about through Kat from Kat's Field Notes. She did a video on her favorite books of all time, and this was one of the books. This is a collection of essays that explore culture, identity, love and relationships, finding oneself, all through the lens of young adulthood. Durga Chubose took inspiration from an essay that Virginia Woolf wrote in her book A Writer's Diary. I believe. A side note, Virginia Woolf is an author who I've really wanted to get into. So if you have any recommendations for where I should start with her, do let me know down in the comment section. These are such beautifully written essays. She is one of those writers who really pays attention to the details and articulates those details so well. And I feel like I can show you better than I can tell you. There's a section in the book where she uses the term nook people to describe people who like to seek corners and subtle lighting and tend to be very sensitive to things going on around them. There's also a section where she talks about those early years of adulthood where you're only responsible for yourself and you're sort of trying to figure out your purpose and what you're meant to be doing. So that is the kind of writing that you get to expect from this book. Moving on to games, this year started off with my foray into the world of Zelda, playing Breath of the Wild for the first time. I actually made an entire video on my thoughts about this game. Essentially, I was a little skeptical about whether I would like it or not. I never played any games in the Zelda franchise apart from a few hours of Twilight Princess. It really didn't take long for me to become captivated by the open world exploration and the amount of detail in this game. That's one of the things that really, I think, sets it apart for me. There's just so much to love about this game, from the sound design to, like I said, the exploration, the open world exploration, the realism to the problem solving. I know that Tears of the Kingdom came out this year. That's what everyone's been talking about. But because I had played Breath of the Wild for the first time so recently, I think I had a hard time getting into Tears of the Kingdom because even though there are a lot of things that are different about it, it just felt too similar to me. So I think maybe I need to give it some time before I come back to Tears of the Kingdom. Lake was another unexpected favorite of mine. I played this game on Steam, on my Steam Deck. I guess you could call this a cozy game if you really wanted to give it a label. It follows Meredith Weiss, who is a software developer, and her dad is taking a 2-week break from his job as a mail carrier in Providence Oaks, Oregon, and Meredith takes over from him for those 2 weeks. So a large part of this game is essentially just you delivering mail, but it's not as bland as it sounds because there's a huge part of the game that's also you building relationships with people in the town, and your dialogue choices actually determine the way that the story progresses. You get to explore love interests. The town itself is beautiful, and I think part of the joy of the game is just being able to drive around and take that scenery in. Now, I also really got into retro gaming this year. I discovered the retro handheld community on YouTube and Reddit, and I bought my first handheld emulator, the Anbernic RG351V. I also later got a PS Vita because I'd never had one. While it was nice to revisit some of the titles from my childhood, I found that a lot of the excitement also came from being able to discover and play titles that I had never experienced as a child. And I found myself drawn to a lot of retro platformers. And one thing you will know about those, if you've played them before, is that they will humble you very quickly. Retro games in general, I think there's a consensus that older games tended to be a lot more difficult. One of my favorite retro platformers has been Donkey Kong Country for the SNES. Still trying to beat that game. It's been months at this point. It's definitely frustrating, but I find myself coming back to it because it's so good. It's such a good game. This year, I also revisited GTA 4, which remains my favorite installment in the GTA franchise. Even though that game was released all the way back in 2008, I think it still holds up really well to this day. I played this game for the first time years ago, never finished it, and so this time was the first time that I actually did a full played through all the missions. I think it remains my favorite because of the storyline, because of where it's set, because it's so reminiscent of New York City, which is one of my favorite places. Nico and Roman, hands down, one of the most iconic video game duos in my opinion. All right, let us transition to movies and shows. I actually haven't watched that many movies this year. I think most of my time has been spent on shows, but there is one movie that I have to talk about, and it's probably my favorite movie I've watched this entire year, and that is Past Lives. I saw that it was an A24 film. I love indie movies, so I knew that it would be something that I'd be interested in. London. It follows the story of Nora and Haesung, who grow up in Seoul, South Korea. As children, they develop a liking for one another. They later reconnect as adults in New York City, and we get to see where they are at that point in each of their lives, you know, the ways that they've grown apart and the choices that they've made over their lives and how that affects the connection that they have. The film uses Nora and Haesung's relationship to explore the concept of inyon, which is Korean for providence or fate. Not only is the storyline heartwarming, but the film is beautifully shot. And I think what I enjoyed the most was those moments where the camera just lingered on the actors and maybe they weren't saying anything, but you know, we could focus in on their expressions, and that said everything that needed to be said. Beautiful acting. I also really enjoyed the cinematography in the way that it portrayed New York and Seoul. And even though the film didn't necessarily end in the way that my idealist self would have wanted it to end, I thought it was so real. It was commentary on the fact that, you know, we make decisions, we make certain decisions in life, and sometimes we just have to live with those, even if, you know, they go against what we perhaps saw for ourselves or wanted for ourselves. There are 3 shows that I want to highlight. The first one is Fleabag. I've had it on my list, and I figured since I had some time this year, I would get around to it. Now, this show follows a woman who we only know as Fleabag. She's dealing with a lot of grief, all while trying to run a business, juggling some very questionable situationships. You wouldn't know that she's dealing with so much because of the way she downplays the effect that everything is having on her. You know, she deflects using sex and comedy. One of the defining characteristics of the show is the breaking of the fourth wall. I actually haven't seen a lot of shows where this is done, but I think it's perfectly executed here, because in those moments where she's speaking directly to us, we can see that she is sort of disassociating from what's going on around her, and it brings us into her mind. The show also centers strained family relationships and deals with things like religion. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is an absolute genius. This is a definite recommendation if you're into dark humor. Now, given the major success that this next show has had, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, and it is The Bear. Now, I tend to love shows and movies that center the culinary world in any way, because I'm just fascinated by that world and how it operates. So I really like movies like Chef, The 100-Foot Journey, Burnt. And I actually didn't know about The Bear until my cousin, who is a chef, recommended that we watch it. And so I watched the first episode or first couple episodes with her. It follows Carmi, who has been a chef for Michelin star restaurants. For reasons that you'll discover when you watch the show, he removes to his hometown, Chicago, to run the family business, which is a sandwich shop called The Beef. And so we get to see him trying to make this restaurant into something. This was my first time getting to see Jeremy Allen White and Ayo Edebiri in action. I have since become a major Ayo Edebiri stan. I watched Bottoms as well this year, which was absolutely chaotic and just overall hilarious. But yeah, coming back to The Bear, the acting was so phenomenal and convincing. There are 2 episodes that really stand out to me. One from season 1, I think it was episode 7, where the majority of the episode is just one uninterrupted take. And the other episode being the Thanksgiving, that famous Thanksgiving episode. It's also a very layered show, so it's not just about the realities of the restaurant business, but we also get to see themes like addiction and suicide and family dysfunction being explored. The final show is Black Cake. If you watched my favorites video last year, you'll remember that I talked about the book Black Cake, and so when I discovered that it was becoming a series, you can imagine my excitement. So Black Cake is a family saga that is set in the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica. It follows the story of Covey, who is a young girl. She's growing up on the island without a mother. Her father has a gambling problem. We see how that eventually has dire consequences for Covey. So we get to see her journey from having to escape the island to reinventing herself time and time again. There are some heavier themes like domestic violence, addiction, race and class issues as well. I was so impressed by Mia Isaac, who plays young Covey. She acted like the rent was due. I really don't have that many criticisms for this show. I think the only thing is that the Jamaican accent seemed a little unnatural or exaggerated in some instances. But other than that, I think this was a great show and a great take on the book. And actually, I thought this was only going to be a limited series because, that's typically what happens when you have a show that is based on a book. But I actually found out that the showrunner pitched 3 seasons. Given the way that the show ended, I think there's a lot more to build on. So let's hope that we get to see more of Black Cake. Okay, so let's talk music now. I'm just going to talk about a few albums and then give some honorable mentions. First, let us talk Leah and her album Bet That. I want to go on record saying that Leah deserves to be big in the industry, okay? I first started listening to her last year when her first EP, Hello, was released. She came up on my recommended on Spotify, and I listened to Sailor Moon and I was hooked. I thought, who is this woman? Why aren't we talking about her more? I learned that she was an up-and-coming artist, and I also learned an interesting fact, which is she actually produced the entire music video for Sailor Moon on her own in her apartment. She did the costumes, she did the set design, she did the editing, everything, which I found so impressive. Her music has this sort of 90s R&B quality. She's said that she's inspired by Missy Elliott. For me, Bet That had no skips. I think maybe a standout for me was definitely Need to Know. I got an artist message from her in my Spotify Wrapped, so that should tell you how much of a fan I am. Another favorite was Blink-182's One More Time. And I think one of the major reasons for this being a favorite for me is the nostalgia factor. It took me back to my angsty preteen days. Blink-182 was a formative part of developing my taste for punk rock music. I also watched the hour-long Apple Music interview that they did with Zane Lowe. It was just very cool to hear them talking about, their journey over the years, breaking up and coming back together, Mark's illness, and, the way Travis is like the quiet glue of the group. Jamila Woods also gave us a new album this year, Water Made Us. Jamila Woods' music for me has always felt very spiritual, earthy, tender. A major theme throughout the album was, love and relationships. Some standouts for me were I Miss All My Exes, which she did with Gia Margaret, who is another one of my favorite artists, and that is like the combo I never knew I needed. And this song, which is more of like a meditative experience, is just so beautiful. The lyrics really speak to, the hopeless romantic in me. There's also a Saba feature on this album, and Saba is another one of my favorite artists out of Chicago. Another favorite was I Told Them by Burna Boy. I started my summer off going to see him on his Love Damini tour. It was the second time that I'd seen him. The first time was when I studied abroad in Berlin. He did not disappoint. It was such an electric show. Good energy all around. He is such an entertainer and definitely one of my top Afrobeats artists. There were definitely some standouts for me, including On Form, Tested, Approved and Trusted, Day Play, and Big 7. Now let's briefly talk Pink Friday 2. As a barb, it is my duty. Let me start off by saying that Nicki Minaj has nothing to prove to us, nothing to prove to me. She owes me nothing. Does that mean that I can't look at this album critically? No. Were there some tracks that I didn't necessarily enjoy? Yeah. Would I say that it eclipses Pink Friday 1? Maybe not. But I've seen people going so far as saying that the album felt lazy and it didn't feel cohesive and that she's just, at this point, just making songs for TikTok, a lot of which I feel is just noise. You're always going to have people who are contributing to that noise. Sometimes I think we expect artists to give us the same sound and the same energy throughout their entire career. We don't give them the space to try something different, to explore different soundscapes, and say what you want. But I think that Nicki Minaj is still showing us that there is no one way to be a woman in rap. We get rap, we get R&B, we get dancehall, we get gospel, okay? It just speaks to her versatility as an artist again, which I think is what people love so much about her. There are those tracks like Blessings and Last Time I Saw You and Just the Memories, which I think was the perfect song to end the album. Songs like that where she is being more vulnerable, you know, sharing some of the experiences that have really been formative for her during her career. So becoming a mother, losing her dad, and there's a level of maturity that requires, and not everyone's going to appreciate that level of vulnerability, right? Some of the standouts on this album for me were Bam Bam, Pink Birthday, Big Difference, Forward from Trini, of course, and I actually really liked Just the Memories. So maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I enjoyed this record. Now, I also wanted to do some honorable mentions. Now, Cleo Sol blessed us with not one, but two albums this year, Heaven and Gold. Sis got us in check. Okay, Sis said, stand up. I was also really happy to see Corinne Bailey Rae giving us some new material with Black Rainbows. I think my favorite song off of that album is Red Horse. I also really got into Boy Genius this year. I was listening to Phoebe Bridgers and Julian Baker separately before I even realized that they were in a band with Lucy Dacus. They have such great chemistry as a band. The performance of Not Strong Enough that they did on Jimmy Kimmel, I think I watched that at least 10 times. Just so good. I also thought it would be interesting for me to show you my Spotify Wrapped for this year, just to give you an idea of, you know, some of the songs that had me in a chokehold, some of the artists that I really loved this year. So yeah, go ahead and judge me. I'm gonna have that up on the screen for you. Now, I think that my favorite app of this year has been Readwise Reader, and I made an entire video on Reader. It was my last video. I'm going to have it linked here if you're interested in learning more about it, but it's essentially a read it later application. It is so well designed. It has allowed me to bring all of my favorite sources into one place, whether it's newsletters or blogs, articles, PDFs. It can even do books, tweets. It syncs with Notion, which I use as sort of a knowledge hub. The next one is not an app, and it's more of a service. So it's the Apple News Plus subscription. So just a bit of context. I used to really love reading newspapers. At home, we used to get newspapers delivered every Sunday, and then even during the week, we'd just, buy the daily newspaper. And, my mom also used to buy a lot of magazines. So we'd always have magazines around the house, Essence, Vogue, Ebony. I realized that I wanted to get back into reading long form content. I knew that it wouldn't be practical for me to have physical subscriptions. So what I decided to do was get a subscription to Apple News Plus. Nothing is ever going to replace that feeling of flipping through a physical magazine or a newspaper, but I think it's a happy medium for me. I've really just enjoyed taking time to sit down with a magazine, maybe the New York Times or the Atlantic. So I know that this has been a long one, probably longer than I anticipated, but thank you for sticking around. If you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe. Comment to let me know what some of your favorites were in any of these categories, and maybe even leave some suggestions based on the content that I have spoken about in today's video. As always, I'd love to hear from you down in the comment section. This is going to be the last video for 2023 from me, and I did just want to say thank you so much for being here, for supporting me, for watching these videos, for liking and subscribing and leaving such nice comments. I try to respond to as many as I can. I really look forward to what next year will hold for me and this channel, and I hope that you'll be here with me along the way. So with that, enjoy the holidays. Merry Christmas if you celebrate it, and Happy New Year. Take good care, and I'll see you in the next video in 2024. Bye.